Good morning and welcome to yet another edition of e-learning from Opokuwari School. This is Form 2 Visual Art class and the subject is General Knowledge in Arts. Last week we started with a topic called perspective. We talked about a lot of it. We talked about what perspective. We said perspective was the art of creating an illusion of distance or depth on a flat surface or two-dimensional, three-dimensional surface. We also said we said it could also be defined as a way of drawing objects or scenes so that they appear to have distance or depth. Well, we also said that it's a way of drawing objects or composing scenes to create an illusion of distance or depth. Now we got to know some terms in perspective. We talked about horizon. What we said, it is the line which appears to divide the earth and the sky. It is the point the earth tends to meet the sky. We said it's a line on which the earth and the sky seems to meet. So if you recall, we made mention of the fact that it is an imaginary line. So in actual fact, there is no line, but you just imagine, and then you just imagine that it is there, but in actual fact it wasn't there. So we talked about that. We also talked about the vanishing point in perspective, where we said it is the point or position at which the receding parallel lines appear to meet on the horizon. So we said vanishing point is a point where receding parallel lines in perspective appear to meet. The word appear there means it doesn't meet, but it seems, it appears to meet. Mind you, also said that vanishing point is the point at which perspective disappears or diminishes. So in perspective, when you are looking at a perspective picture, when you get to the vanishing point, you wouldn't see anything beyond that. Okay, so we also got to know picture plane, where we said it is the area or surface on which drawing is done. So any area at all on which any drawing is done is called picture plane. So if I have a paper and I'm going to draw on the paper, that paper becomes the picture plane. We talked about that. We talked about eye level in perspective. We are saying that in drawing there are always different positions that objects appear to the eye. In practice, every object appears to the eye in 3 levels of positions. And we said we have below eye level, above eye level, and at eye level or normal level. So the first one is normal eye level. Now this is when objects seen by the eye is neither top nor bottom. So when the object is at eye level, you neither see the top nor the bottom of it. So you see the side of it. So we say that object is at normal eye level or is at eye level. So as I'm standing here, all the objects in front of me like this, I see neither the top nor the bottom. I will say that object is at eye level or normal eye level. We also said above eye level. This is when objects are seen higher than the eye level. Its underside will be seen. So when we look at above eye level, with that eye level, the under part of the object is seen. You wouldn't see the top part, but the under part of the object is seen. By so doing, we say it is above eye level. And then we also talked about below eye level, where the top part of the object is seen. So the difference between above and below is that with above you see the top of the object, you wouldn't see the bottom, and then below eye level you see the bottom, but you wouldn't see the top. Okay, so when it's above eye level, you see the underside, which is the bottom, but you wouldn't see the top. When it's below eye level, you see the top, but you wouldn't see the bottom. So below eye level, you can say it's at bird's view. Bird's view. So you see birds when they fly in the sky, so they will see the top. So it has bird's view. Okay. Now, this is an example of perspective. We talked about this. All that we are doing, we are trying to recap what we discussed last week. So we talked about all these things. This was the vanishing point we talked about. I indicated it to you. So this point, they say that you see all parallel lines in perspective, they meet there. So that point is what we call the vanishing point. We also talked about the horizon. We said it's a seemingly imaginary line on which the sky and the earth meet. We are talking about this line. So when you are standing here and you look afar, you will see that it will get to a point where the sky will seem to be meeting the earth, and you see there will be a line there. The line necessarily is not always straight. It depends on the objects around. It could be that there will be trees around and they don't have flat tops, so it will be a bit rough, but you will see a line there. That line is what we call the horizon. So, and this is the picture plane. You see, this is the picture, and the area there is the picture plane. We talked about it. Okay. So this is an example of the types of eye level that we talked about. You see, if you look at this object, it's above eye level. So these are huge high-rising buildings. So you see that you see the bottom, but you only see the top. Okay. So this is a typical example of objects that are above eye level. If I take this one, they say that below eye level or it's at bird's view. Okay. So if you look at this, you could see that you could see the tops of all these buildings around, but you wouldn't see the bottom. So this particular object is at bird's view. You will get these shots best when you use a drone camera. Drone cameras normally are used to get objects that are below eye level. Okay, and then the normal eye level, you neither see the top or the bottom, you see it as it is. So this one is normal eye level or eye level. Okay, now we move on. We come to our topic for today, which is types of perspective. Types of perspective. But before that, need I remind you that by the time we are through with what we are going to do today, you should be able to explain the types of perspective. Mind you, we started with the first one last week. That's why I'm just recapping the objective that we stated the other time. Because of time constraints, we were not able to finish, but we stated the objectives that we were supposed to achieve. So we should be able to at least explain the types of perspective, that is the linear perspective as well as the aerial perspective. Okay, so we take them one after the other. Last week we explained the linear perspective. We talked about it extensively. Let's try to remind ourselves a bit on that before we come to the other type. Mind you, I told you that we have two types of perspective, which is the linear perspective and then aerial or color or atmospheric perspective. I'm sure you've not forgotten. And then we discussed linear perspective. I wouldn't want to jump the linear perspective. Let's try to refresh our mind small so that we can move on to the second type of perspective. Now we say linear perspective, it deals with lines and forms of things or size of objects that are reduced in size with distances. So if you quite remember, we said with linear perspective, it is a type of perspective that deals with lines. In linear perspective, lines are used to indicate the perspective. I hope you've not forgotten. Now we also said that it is the act of showing the size of objects in space distance as they really appear to the eye. We talked about it. I wouldn't want to waste time there. Now we got to types of linear perspective. That was where we got to. We got to types of linear perspective, and we said there are three main types of linear perspective. There are three main types of linear perspective. So don't confuse yourself. We have two types of perspective. That is the linear perspective and the aerial perspective. But under linear perspective, we have three types of linear perspective. We have 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, and 3-point perspective. We have 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, and 3-point perspective. So we start with 1-point perspective. Another name for 1-point perspective is parallel perspective. Okay, so take note. In some books, they will give you the two. They will say 1 point or parallel. But in some books too, they will give you only 1 point. So if you are asked what's another name for 1-point perspective, or when you see parallel, the same as 1-point perspective. Okay, so now let's read it together. Okay, you go. All parallel lines moving horizontally away from the viewer converge at the vanishing point. When we talk of 1-point perspective, all parallel lines moving horizontally away from the viewer converge at the vanishing point. All parallel lines moving horizontally away from the viewer converge at the vanishing point. And the vanishing point we are talking about is just one point, just one vanishing point. So in one point perspective, one thing that you have to have at the back of your mind is that all parallel lines moving horizontally converge at one point. The sizes and spaces of the lines diminishes as it gets closer to the vanishing point. Okay, so in one point perspective, there is only one vanishing point, that's 1. And then 2, the sizes and spaces between lines diminishes as it gets closer to the vanishing point. The sizes and spaces of the lines diminishes, or you can say reduces. Diminishes is the same, it reduces as it gets closer to the vanishing point. Okay, example, a long stretch of road, railway, etc. etc. So a typical example is along a stretch of road, railway lines, etc. So that's our take for one point perspective. We are saying that one point perspective, there is only one vanishing point. Again, the sizes and spaces of lines reduces or diminishes as it gets closer to the vanishing point. Okay, we are moving on. This is a typical example of a one point perspective scenery or view. So if you look at it clearly, you see that all the horizontal lines here are converging at just one vanishing point. Okay, and the size of the buildings reduces in size as it moves to the vanishing point. So look at this building here and look at this building here. It's of the same size. Okay, this particular building here and this one is of the same size, but because of one point perspective, the size of this has reduced because it is moving towards the vanishing point. Look at the building there. This building is taller than this one. This particular building is taller than this building, but because of one point perspective, and which says that objects that are moving away from the viewer to the vanishing point reduces, this particular building has reduced in size, whereas this one is big. But in actual fact, this particular building is bigger than that one. Please, is it okay? So in one point perspective, objects that are moving towards the vanishing point reduces in size. Okay. Now we are moving on to the next one, which is 2-point perspective or angular perspective. So another name for 2-point perspective is what? Angular perspective. Another name for 1-point perspective is parallel perspective. Another name for 2-point perspective is what? Angular perspective. Let's look at that one too. Now it occurs when a set of two parallel lines converge at separate vanishing points on the same horizon. It occurs when a set of two parallel lines converge at separate vanishing points on the same horizon. Yeah, we take it for the last time. It occurs when a set of two parallel lines converge at separate vanishing points on the same horizon. So if you are to compare this one to that of 1 point, you see that with 1-point perspective, it has only one vanishing point. Or when it comes to 2-point perspective or angular perspective, it has two vanishing points, but on the same horizon. Okay. It enables a picture plane to be divided into 3 parts. That is the foreground, the midground, and the background. So because of the principle of two perspective, we are able to identify foreground, middle ground, and background in a picture. Okay. Now this is a typical example of a 2-point perspective. if you look at the picture I have on the board, you will clearly see that this side of the building will converge at one point. Although it didn't come, at least you can deduce from it. If you look at this side of the building, as it moves, will converge at one point, whereas the other side, which is this side, when it moves, two will converge at one point. So you get 2 points, but it will be on the same horizon. If I'm to draw a line between it, you could see that it will be on the same horizon. So if I'm to extend this one, you see that it will be here. 1 point will be here. If I have to extend this one, you see that it will be here. Another point will be here, which is 2 points. Okay, it will be on the same horizon. So this is a typical example of 2-point perspective or angular perspective. We move on to the next one, which is 3-point perspective. So 3-point perspective. Another name for 3-point perspective is isometric perspective or oblique perspective. Another name for 3-point perspective is isometric perspective or oblique perspective. So when you see isometric perspective, know that it's the same as 3-point perspective. When you see oblique perspective, know that it's the same as 3-point perspective. Okay, so let's look at it. It is a technique of rendering 3 sets of parallel lines converging at separate vanishing points on the same horizon. It helps artists to draw. So with 3-point perspective, it has 3 separate vanishing points. So take note, 1-point perspective has 1 vanishing point, 2-point perspective has 2 vanishing points, and 3-point perspective has 3 vanishing points. Let's look at the image on the board. You will see that this from this side to this side will give you 1 point. As it moves here, you see that this side will end, giving you 1 point or 1 vanishing point. When you look at this side too, the same thing will give you another vanishing point. When you stand here and look to the top, you see too that there's another vanishing point there. So you get 3 vanishing points on the same horizon from one particular picture. And that one is called 3-point perspective or isometric perspective or oblique perspective. Please, I hope we are okay. Okay. So that is it for linear perspective. So we are saying that linear perspective has to do with perspective where all vertical lines moving horizontally converges at 1 point. And we are saying that with linear perspective, there are 3 types of linear perspective. We have 1-point perspective or vanishing point or parallel line. We have 2-point perspective or angular, and we have 3-point perspective or isometric or oblique. Okay. And we are saying that with 1-point perspective, it has 1 vanishing point. 2-point perspective, it has 2 vanishing points, and then 3-point perspective has 3 vanishing points. Now let's look at the other type of perspective. Mind you, we said we had 2 types of perspective, which is the linear perspective and the aerial or color or atmospheric perspective. So we are done with the linear perspective. Let's come to the second type of perspective, which is aerial or color perspective or atmospheric. Mind you, so color perspective is the same as aerial perspective, is the same as atmospheric perspective. In some books, they wouldn't even write color perspective, they will write atmospheric perspective. It's the same as color perspective. If you don't see color perspective and atmospheric and you see aerial perspective, it is the same as color perspective and atmospheric perspective. Okay? Okay, so let's look at that one. Now, this deals with the changes in the tones and colors of objects as they recede from the viewer. Now, with atmospheric or color perspective, shades and tones are used to show distance. So for instance, here we don't use lines unlike linear perspective, but with the color perspective when you want to create it using colors, you use shades and tones. You can also use pencil to do it. What you do is the objects that are far away has dull colors, or their tones are very light, and those that are closer to the viewer has brighter colors, or their tones are very dark. So if I have 5 individuals in front of me in a queue, and I'm to depict them using aerial perspective, what I will do is, maybe they might be of the same complexion, or they'll be wearing the same uniform or the same attire. But what I'll do is, those who are closer to me, their shirts, the color of their shirts is going to be brighter than those that are in a distance or those that are far from me. Okay, so we are saying that it deals with changes in the tones and colors. So if I'm doing it, the person who is closer to me will have a darker tone, and those who are in a distance will have a lighter tone. Because when you go to a stadium, let me use a stadium for example. When you go to a stadium, those who are at the VIP, let me use Baba Yara Sports Stadium for example. Those who are at the VIP, they will see those at the center line paler. They wouldn't see them clearly. They will see them like dots. Okay, if you are to move to the Baba Yara Stadium, of which I'm sure you've gone there before for your interco and those stuffs, when you are seated at the VIP lounge, you will see those at center line as dots. So if you have been asked to depict them using color perspective, you need to do things for people to see that, oh, these individuals are in a distance, they can't be seen properly. So what you do is, those that are in a distance, their colors will be very, very pale. You see them in a paler form as compared to those who are closer. You also said that objects closer to the viewer are more vivid. Take note of these keywords, they are very, very important. Objects that are closer to the viewer are more vivid, clearer, and intense than those far away from the viewer. This one is supposed to be N, so you do the correction. Than those far away from the viewer. You understand? So objects closer to the viewer, as I've already indicated, objects closer to the viewer are more vivid. So that was what I said. Let's say in this class, I have about 50 students in this class. If I'm to depict you in aerial perspective, those in the front row will appear more vivid and clearer than those at the back row. Okay, so if I'm to use, let me say, color green to paint everybody, I will use deep green to paint those in the front row, and then I will tint it. When I talk of tint, I hope you understand. Tint is adding white to a color to make it lighter. So I will tint it to paint those that are in a distance. Okay. So objects closer to the viewer are more vivid, clearer, and intense than those far away from the viewer, which tends to be pale. Take note of these words. So those objects that are closer to the viewer are vivid and clearer, and those that are in the distance are pale and they fade. These two words defines the two. Take note of it. These two words define the two. So objects that are closer to the viewer appears vivid, clearer, and brighter. Those that are in a distance or that are away from the viewer appears pale and they fade or recede into the background. Let's take a look at this particular picture I have on the board. If you look at this particular picture, you will clearly see that these objects, so if you look at the picture very well, where is the viewer standing? Or the person who took the picture, where did he stand to take the picture? I'm sure your answer is as good as mine. The person was standing somewhere here. So that means the person took the picture from this side to that side. Okay? Now if you look at this side, which is closer to the viewer, the tones are deeper as compared to those in the distance. Okay, if you look at the tones comparatively, you will say that the tones closer to the viewer are more intense and vivid as compared to those that are in the distance. So this is how we use color to achieve perspective. So take note, we can use lines to achieve perspective, which will fall under linear perspective, and then we can use colors, tones and shades also to achieve perspective, which is color or area or atmospheric perspective. I hope it's okay. Okay, now let's move on to importance of perspective. Importance of perspective. Importance of perspective is very, very key. You know all these things. And what does perspective mean to us? Of what use, of what importance is it to an artist or a designer? Okay, so one, it creates the illusion of distance in art. It creates the illusion of distance in art. We are saying that last time when we met, remember I explained illusion to you. I said illusion is something that looks like but it's not. Okay, it looks like but it's not. As if, but it's not. So perspective creates illusion of distance in art. So with the principle of, or with the use of perspective, you can create distance in art, but in actual fact, there wouldn't be any distance on the paper. But because of perspective, you can create that distance. The second one, it is used to show relative proportion. It is used to show relative proportion. So here, you can use perspective to differentiate the intensity or the tones or the sizes. Okay, so you can use perspective to show proportion in a particular work of art. You can use perspective to show the relative intensity, the tones, the dimensions, the proportion, the sizes in the various objects in a particular work of art. If I'm to go back to this picture, you could see that proportion has been created. Differentiation has been created with the use of perspective. So you could clearly see the differences. Okay, you could see the proportion. Okay, now let's move on to the third one. It is used to draw landscapes. It is used to draw landscapes. It is used to draw landscapes. So if there were to be no perspective, it would have been extremely difficult to depict landscape. But because of perspective, now you'll be able to draw and see. You could see that here is mountainous area. You could see that there's a mountain here, there's a mountain here. I'm sure this particular mountain is very, very, very big. But because of the principle of perspective, you see it very, very small. Okay, so we can use perspective to draw landscapes. But for perspective, drawing of landscape would have been extremely difficult. Or should I say extremely impossible. Okay, so you move on to the next one. It is used to create tones and colors to suggest nearness and distance. Okay, it is used to create tones. So you can see that here is lighter, this place is a bit lighter, this place is darker. So it is used to create tones. You can use perspective to create tones from light to dark to middle tone. Okay, so but for perspective, it would have been difficult to create tones in a particular work of art, or should I say an artwork. Okay, now we move on to the next one, or probably let me say the last one. It gives the appearance of three-dimensional forms on a flat surface, making it appear solid and real. It gives the appearance of three-dimensional forms on a flat surface, making it appear solid and real. Now, let's go back to the buildings. Okay, let me use this one. If you look at this very well, the thing was drawn on a flat surface, but you could see that it has given it a three-dimensionality. It has given it solidity. It has given it form. You see, it's on a flat surface, but you as if the thing has been built on the paper. So because of perspective, it has been able to give it a 3D form. Okay, so that is it for perspective. Now so today what we got to know perspective. We got to know the types of perspective. We talked about the two types of perspective, which is the linear and aerial perspective. We said we have three types of linear perspective. Please make sure you don't confuse yourself with this. We have two main types of perspective. So the perspective in general, we have two main types, which is the linear and the aerial perspective. Okay, and then under linear perspective, we have three types of linear perspective. That is the 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, and 3-point perspective. And we said that 1-point perspective has 1 vanishing point, 2-point perspective has 2 vanishing points, and 3-point perspective has 3 vanishing points. We came to the aerial perspective, where we said it is a form of perspective where tones, shades, and shades of colors are used to depict or show objects that are closer and those that are far. We made mention of the fact that in aerial perspective, objects that are closer to the viewer appears vivid and clearer as compared to those that are in the distance. And we said those that are away from the viewer appears to be pale and fade. They fade away, or they are very, very pale or dull. We also talked about importance of perspective, where we said it creates the illusion of distance in art. It is used to show relative proportions. It is used to draw landscapes. It is used to grade tones and colors to suggest nearness and distance. It gives the appearance of three-dimensional forms on a flat surface, making it appear solid and real. Students, this brings us to the end of our lesson, but I'll give an assignment. It's going to be a practical assignment. It's not going to be a written assignment. I want you to do an aerial perspective of your house, the house that you are staying in or you are living in. I want you to do a three-dimensional, an aerial perspective of that house. The size of your work is A3, and it should be in full color. Full color. It should be in full color. So that brings us to our topic for the day, and then I'll leave you here, and I'll meet you some other time. But as I'm leaving you with inspirational words, which is stay safe, stay at home, wash your hands under running water with soap. Last but not least, don't do what I wouldn't do, and you know what I will not do. Don't do what I will not do, and let prayers be our guide. Thank you, and God bless us all.